Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, and the Lord is risen. Alleluia. He is truly risen. A very, very blessed Easter Monday to you. Easter Monday, it just gets me fired up. I am so glad to be here. I'm so glad to get to say Alleluia, to talk about the resurrection of the Lord. And who better to have these conversations with than the one and only Mr. Trent Horn. Hi, Trent Horn.
Hello, Cy. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed.
Amen.
Glorious Easter.
And you, now that you live where you live, do they have a Byzantine church for you?
They do. I attend. Now, I am not of the Byzantine rite myself, but that may change in the future. We'll have to see. But my family, we've been attending a Ruthenian Byzantine Catholic church for about 2 years now, and it's glorious. It's really glorious to transition into Easter because during Lent in the Byzantine Church, the liturgy is different.
Yeah.
And so it's Lent, or the Great Fast, as it's called in the East. And it's like a half hour longer. So it's a little bit of your Lenten penance during Lent, but it's still beautiful, but it's great.
Ah, okay. So you're back, or now you're in, it's called the Easter season? Because for Catholics, this is the Easter season. It will go on until Pentecost in June. No, not in June this year. It must be is it June? Yeah? Oh, it's in May. Okay, yeah. I was just thinking, that doesn't add up. Sorry.
It's a long Easter.
That's a long Easter.
2 months of Easter. It's huge, a huge Easter.
Well, in a certain sense, it's all Easter. I mean, even in Lent, we don't forget that the Lord is risen. We just
no, but it really is Easter now. Don't go down that road. That's like people who say like every day is Mother's Day in our house. Every day is Easter in our house.
Well, all right, fine. I didn't realize that I was getting
now.
that.
Now is the time to really I see where you're coming from. It's the time to rejoice, and though we'd say Easter in the East. Pascha is probably the more common term.
Yeah,
because we're celebrating the Paschal mystery.
A joyful time, and we're going to talk with you about resurrection both hours today.
Yes.
And I'm very grateful that you're here to do it with us. So maybe we could just start with a very, very basic question, and whether you want to take a theological or a philosophical answer to it, what is the resurrection of the body?
Well, the resurrection of the body is the doctrine that we will be reunited, that after death, at the last judgment, we will be our souls, the souls of the elect, those who will spend eternity with God, as well as the souls of the damned, those who will spend eternity apart from God. Our souls will be reunited with our bodies. So this is what the Catechism says in paragraph 997. In death, the separation of the soul from the body, the human body decays and the soul goes to meet God while awaiting its reunion with its glorified body. God, in his almighty power, will definitively grant incorruptible life to our bodies by reuniting them with our souls through the power of Jesus' resurrection. So to understand the resurrection of the body, then the key elements here are that we will be reunited with our bodies after death at the final judgment, but they will not be it will be the body we had on earth, but it will not be in its same form. It will be glorified through the power of Christ's resurrection, and it will be given incorruptible life. So, and that's something that when you see the early Christian proclamation, even St. Paul trying to preach the resurrection, many people in the ancient world, even today, misunderstood it. Like in the ancient world, people are thinking, wait. Okay, so we're going to rise from the dead. We're going to get back. What are we going to get back? Like our old bodies? Am I going to be just like, because in ancient Judaism, you collected bones as like a bone box. It's like, so wait, are you saying I'm going to, now this would be more the pagans who would say this, not the Jews, because many of the Jews believed in the resurrection of the dead, and they didn't think you came back as a skeleton from a bone box, but pagans might have thought, well, wait, what do you mean? Am I going to be like a zombie or something? And that's something, Si, that even atheists are critical of when we talk about that Jesus rose from the dead. They'll say, oh, you worship a zombie. No, a zombie is a person who lacks consciousness. So a zombie is a corpse that is animated, that acts, but it has no consciousness whatsoever. It's not aware of anything, or maybe the very minimal brains, but but we're not going to be zombies because we will be fully alive in Christ. We'll have a consciousness beyond what we have now and a body to go right along with it.
Okay, so it's interesting to think about that. This is not like something that the ancient person was like, I get it, and we modern people struggle with. It's a idea that requires a lot of clarity and explanation because there's a lot of ways to get resurrection wrong.
Absolutely. So resurrection is not resuscitation.
Yeah,
that would be being brought back. So so what we've talked about so far is zombification.
Yeah,
that would be if your body comes back to life in its decomposed state, but it lacks consciousness.
can I just ask you a quick? Did you ever hear Bob Hope's zombie joke?
No, I have not.
I don't know. I'll So you were just describing a zombie. There's a famous Bob Hope movie, and I don't want to offend anyone with this. It's just a silly Bob Hope joke, but the person is describing a zombie to Bob Hope, and it's like walks around without a mind of its own, and all these other descriptions that are very like that. It's kind of helpless and it doesn't think for itself and it follows along. And Bob Hope goes, "Oh, you mean a Democrat?" And that was very funny back in the day, I think. But I don't know. Maybe people are too polarized now to think that that's funny.
Guess what, Cy?
Yeah.
You're canceled.
Am I canceled? It's just an old Bob Hope joke.
Bob Hope got canceled. Everybody before like 10 minutes ago got canceled. So, but you know what, Cy, though, if someone is canceled, we say they're offensive, but we bring them back. It's kind of like resurrecting their career. It's brought back, but in even a more glorious form in order to bring it back.
I'm so sorry that your description of zombies just made me want to say the Bob Hope joke, but you can't just say it because then people will think, oh, that's what you really think about Democrats. It's just an old Bob Hope joke.
Well, it's like a lot of other jokes where you insert group you want to poke fun at.
Right, but I couldn't think of one. Off the top of my head, I couldn't think of like a good group to throw in there. You know, like what would you say? Like,
Catholic Answers Apologists. That's just how we all are.
That's not right.
Whenever in doubt, Cy, whenever in doubt, you can always go to self-deprecating humor. It may fall flat, but at least nobody gets offended.
Yeah, that's true. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're not talking about zombification.
No, we're not talking about zombification because you'll be fully conscious and aware, not like a zombie or something like that. We're also not talking about resuscitation because some people will say, well, why is Jesus' resurrection such a big deal? I mean, in Scripture, there's a lot of people that come back to life, right? Like Lazarus comes back to life, comes back from the dead. The widow at Nain's son comes back from the dead. Jairus' daughter is dead or close to death. Depending on how you read it, but there's multiple people that are described as coming back from the dead, and the resurrection from the dead is not a mere coming back from the dead, even with our conscious state, because it is also the fact that we arise to glorious immortal life. So, like when Lazarus came back from the dead, recording the Gospel of John, he eventually died again. So he would have eventually died one more time.
Okay.
And the same for everyone else in Scripture. Jesus' resurrection from the dead, however, one is done under his own power. So it's not like Lazarus was raised by someone else. Christ rose himself, though we can say the Father and the Spirit raised Jesus because the actions of the Trinity are manifested in all three persons. God raised Jesus from the dead means the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are all equally involved. But that means Jesus he raises himself. In John chapter 2, he says, destroy this temple, in referring to himself, I will build it back up again. I will raise it up again. And so he has risen, but he will never die again. He has glorious immortal life. I think it's Revelation 1:18. I want to say it's in the book of Revelation. Jesus says, and here, this is the vision of Jesus in heaven. He says, I once was dead and am now alive. I hold the keys to death forever. So we're not zombification, not resuscitation, not transmigration of the soul. Resurrection is not just the soul leaves the body and it's just your soul in heaven forever. That's a very common error that goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks, that they believe that that eternal life, that was basically just your soul in the pits of Tartarus or the Elysian fields. Your soul was who you were. Your body didn't matter. And so they didn't really have a concept of the idea of resurrection. I'll give you an example of that from the book of Acts. So when Paul was in Athens and he was preaching to them, He saw the city was full of idols, as Acts 17:16, and so he wanted to preach the gospel to them. He went into the marketplace, the agora, to do that. And it says, some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers met him, and some said, "What would this babbler say?" Others said, "He seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities, because he preached Jesus and the resurrection." So here, the Greeks thought that when Paul was speaking about resurrection, which in Greek was anastasis, or agero, depending on which word you use, but typically anastasis, they thought this was like another god he was talking about, along with Jesus, not like a thing that would happen to you. It was a very foreign concept to them.
One other thing that does not happen, and I think Christians are confused about this, resurrection does not mean you become an angel in heaven.
Yes, and this happens sometimes, Si, when you hear especially like the death of a child, for example.
Right.
And it's always hard when someone is grieving. People will say things and thoughtful things like, well, now you have an angel in heaven. Now, and I've heard a lot of people, though, say, like, I thought when you died, you became an angel. And I really want to write a book called, like, The Alternative Baltimore Catechism. Like, there's I feel like there's like this like old, very, very old, like Catholic folk theology that everyone heard from their grandparents. And like, that's one of them.
Yes, right.
That it's like, when you die and go to heaven, you become an angel. And that's like, its roots. It's like, well, no, that's not what happened. And like, when we say like you have an angel in heaven, that can mean like you have a beloved child who is interceding for you in heaven. And if that's what you mean,
right,
that's completely appropriate. But if what you mean is your child is now a literal angel,
no.
Well, no, because angels, what they are is that they're pure spirits. They're just intellect. So they are beings who have intellect, but do not have bodies and never will have bodies. What makes humans different is that we have bodies, and that we're not, and this is what can be hard for people, we are not a human being without our body. So like when we die and go to heaven, it's hard, you can't even really say that you're in heaven or you're in purgatory. It's more proper to say your soul is in heaven or your soul is in purgatory, because who we are as human beings, we are a composite of body and soul.
Yeah.
And so, and if you don't have the body, upon death, you don't have a human being anymore. You have a corpse, a deceased body that is no longer alive, and you have the soul. Now, so when Christ's existence as a human being, if you will, I want to be careful with my terms here, ceased upon his death because his soul separated from his body. Now, of course, because he is a divine person, he is united to his soul and his body through his divinity, through his divine person. That is what allows him uniquely to resurrect or reunite his soul and body. For the rest of us, we wait for God's almighty power to reunite our bodies with our souls at the last judgment, at the final judgment, the resurrection of the dead, when all things will be made clear, and then there will be eternal life, or, well, eternal good life and eternal bad life meted out to us.
Trent Horn is our guest. We're going to keep talking about the resurrection. I got a whole bunch more questions for Trent about the resurrection. It really is good news, and the news gets better and better the more you know what Christ and his church actually teach about a resurrection. I hear you on I want to write that alternate Baltimore catechism, but I'm going to say don't do it. I just don't think you can catch lightning in a bottle like you did with Things the Saints Never Said again. I think that's a one-time thing. And I wouldn't give it a shot. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Trent Horn on the resurrection right after this.
Catch Catholic Answers live anytime at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
check out EWTN's official YouTube channel.
Just follow the link on our homepage at EWTN.com or go to YouTube.com/EWTN.
Watch EWTN's live shows or today's homily from the Daily Mass.
Click the upload button to see our most recent clips.
You can also find all of EWTN YouTube content by clicking the playlist button.
It's all on the official EWTN YouTube channel at youtube.com/EWTN.
Visit today.
Happy Easter and welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I get to say Happy Easter all week. We are in, as Catholics, what's called the octave of Easter, 8 days of celebrating Easter that now ends with the feast, with the Divine Mercy feast. So it's even had a little bit of modern updating under Pope John Paul II, but it is 8 days of celebrating the resurrection of the Lord, who is risen from the dead and who has promised the same to us, and he will keep his promise. So that tells us what we're doing now, this life that we are living now, is just a very beginning of something much greater that when all is revealed, we will understand more fully. So we have Trent Horn with us, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, the author of a whole bunch of books, including Persuasive Pro-Life, Answering Atheism, and the very, very popular book, Why We're Catholic, and we're asking him about resurrection. So if I were to go back and say, talk to St. Paul, who writes quite a bit about resurrection, because I think there's some confusion among, I think it's the Ephesians who got confused about resurrection, if I remember the letters correctly. Wait, I don't have any audio for, go ahead. We didn't have your audio for a second.
Oh, okay. Well, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, now Paul does talk about resurrection and, especially the Lord's coming in some of his other letters like Thessalonians. But in 1 Corinthians 15,
Right.
But 1 Corinthians 15 is probably his most extended treatise on the resurrection. And there he is responding to people in Corinth who are doubting there will be a resurrection of the dead at all. And his argument is essentially, okay, you're saying there is no resurrection of the dead. If there is no resurrection of the dead, then Christ is not raised. But Christ is raised. Therefore, there is a resurrection of the dead. And so he's running this particular argument saying Christ's resurrection shows us there is a resurrection of the dead, and we have that hope in him. He says that Christ is the first fruits of the resurrection. This is an agricultural term to refer to the part of the crops that show, okay, the harvest is almost here because these first parts of the crop are now ready, and Christ represents that for us. If Christ is risen, because we have died with Christ in baptism, as Paul says in Romans chapter 6, we will rise with him as well in his resurrection because we're united with him.
Yeah.
We're united in his death. Because of that, we are also united in his resurrection. So in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul lays out, well, what do you mean by resurrection? He says that we will be changed in the twinkling of an eye. And he talks about corruptible, incorruptible bodies, the stars and the animals and plants. There's different kinds of bodies. He says, look, there's different kinds of bodies, and we're going to have a different kind of body. But he makes it clear, he talks about what is sown corruptible will be raised incorruptible.
Yeah.
And in Philippians 3:21, he's very clear. And we'll probably talk about this in the second hour, because some people try to say, Paul thought we were going to get a new body in heaven. That body is like waiting for us up there we're going to get. No, in Philippians 3:21, Paul says Christ will change our lowly bodies to be like his glorious resurrected body. We will keep the same body, but we're going to get a really good system upgrade.
So if I could just ask you a question about resurrection, almost from a philosophical point of view then. Resurrection implies that there's a corpse which is raised, and so that there's some connection. And I have heard it proposed, and I wonder it to your philosophical mind if this makes sense, that
Right.
that is actually what happens, and that there's no problem, even if your body is entirely, say, disintegrated down to the atomic level, let's say.
Right.
Well, that it's nothing for Jesus to in his divine mind to just track those atoms through history and raise you from the dead. We know from modern science, in other words, that there's a conservation of matter and energy, and
Right.
and so there's no circumstance in which resurrection, thought of as the actual resurrection of your body, is impossible.
Well, this might be fun to jump into the philosophy a little bit of its side to go back and forth, because there are some philosophical puzzles that arise even when we understand, okay, because, yeah, that could be a difficulty to an ancient person who might have thought that your body at some point could be annihilated, and so it no longer exists in the world in any form. Now, we understand at the most basic level, you're right, even if you were disintegrated in an explosion or something like that, the atoms that constituted your body at your death would still exist in some form. And it doesn't seem hard for Jesus to say, all right, here they all are, put them back together again, there you are. But there are still some philosophical problems that arise. One of the problems would be that some people die their atomic structure is scattered. It probably ends up in the grass.
Yeah.
The grass gets eaten by a cow. The cow gets eaten by you or me when we go get a burger, and then we die right after we eat that burger.
Wait, I have to sing.
So
I have to sing the Circle of Life now. I think that's a requirement of radio. If someone says that stuff you just said, you have to sing the Circle of Life. Are you ready?
If you want to, I will belt it out if you want.
Oh no, I don't want to. All right, I'm gonna break radio
and
rules.
It moves us
there he goes. Oh, that's why I'll start
crying.
Don't make me cry, Trent.
Till we find our way. Oh, that was terrible.
Gosh,
that was
Elton
just
John.
awful.
Elton John just hitting it out of the park with Lion King. Okay, so it does move us all. All right, sorry. I'm sorry.
I think I killed the Lion King soundtrack so much. I don't even think in God's omnipotence he could have resurrected it.
You can't resurrect
from
that.
I annihilated it. It went out of existence. So what if your some of the atoms in your body belonged in another person's body?
Sure. Why not? Okay. Yeah. Oh, I see. So there's a philosophical problem there. Yeah, right. But also
who gets some.
Yeah, but here's the thing though. When I was born, I was a baby.
That is very philosophically astute.
Okay, so I'm not a baby anymore. There's been a turnover of the atoms and molecules in my body throughout my life. So there's a whole history of atoms and molecules. I've left a trail of atoms and molecules that are now dispersed across this earth and maybe even into outer space.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you've raised this response.
Okay.
Because this is essentially what you just said is essentially St. Thomas Aquinas's answer to the problem.
We're practically the same, me and Thomas Aquinas.
You guys are
like
running
buds.
on the same wavelength.
Yeah, he was born a baby too.
Well, right, yeah. This is what he says about the problem of sharing atoms with other people. And for him, the illustration of the problem are cannibals. Like, what do you do with somebody who feasts on human flesh? And so for him, he didn't think of atoms are going to be he didn't have atomic structure thinking oh, that's where it's us. For him, it was a more immediate problem. What do you do with someone who part of their diet is they eat human flesh? And so that is what constitutes part of their being. So his answer is essentially that, well, there is no set fixed unit at the end of our life or anything like that. We're these and only these are the atoms that make up me. This is what Aquinas writes. In respect to matter, of course, the parts are in flux, but this is not an obstacle to the deceased, being numerically one from the beginning of his life to the end of it, including when we're raised. An example of this can be taken from fire. While it continues to burn, it is called numerically one because its species persists. Yet wood is consumed and new wood is applied. It is also like this in the human body, for the form and species of its single parts remain continuously through a whole life. The matter of the parts is not only resolved by the action of the natural heat, but is replenished anew by nourishment. So just as I might say, okay, I have one campfire here. It's the same campfire throughout our whole camp out, but there's been different wood that's been put in and out to keep the fire going. So there's no difficulty in saying that our bodies take in matter, nutrients, shed them, different atoms compose them. And so what Aquinas would say is, well, even if you share body parts with other persons, God in his omnipotence, there's nothing to prevent him from creating new matter to be continuous with the matter that's been resurrected from you, to kind of fill in the gap. And then he even goes further to say what if the cannibal only ate cannibals or only ate human flesh? And what if his parents only ate human flesh? And he has all these qualifiers to show, okay, there's still a seed he gets from the parents that's unique to him that God can take from that seed to give him an entire resurrected body that's continuous with his previous one. I give him credit for thinking it all through. Fortunately for it is, unfortunately for Thomas, there is no one who his entire life is fed on cannibalistic diets that we know now. But he was trying to think it ahead. I'll give you one other one though for a philosophical difficulty, and if we have to talk about it after the break, we will. A modern philosopher, Peter van Inwagen, gives this example. He says, okay, God raised me up from the dead. Is it me, though? And he said, one night I was walking down, my kids went to bed, and I knocked over the wood blocks my 4-year-old had been stacking, or my 2-year-old had stacked in the living room. I knocked them over. So I just restacked them, acted like nothing happened, and, went back to bed. Is it the same stack, though? A puzzle we need to resolve when we return.
Trent Horn is our guest. We're talking about resurrection, and if we seem happy, it's because it's the Easter season and the Lord is risen. We'll be right back with more Easter and resurrection with Trent Horn right here on Catholic Answers Live.
Call us now with your question on Catholic Answers Live.
According to divine command, we should give God worship, but how do we know if we're doing it right? Is worship a form of self-help to make me feel better, a form of social activism, or even a commodity? Or is it something that transcends all of those? In Real Religion, How to Avoid False Faith and Worship God in Spirit and Truth, Father Jeff Kirby cuts through the misguided modern notions about God and religion and takes you back to the foundation for true worship, God's revelation about himself. From his first contact with his chosen people to the culmination of his revelation in Jesus Christ, God shows us what religion is supposed to be like and how to make the practice of it a lifelong virtue in our lives. Order your copy of Real Religion by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Here's a question. Is it really possible to be friends with someone who died 2,000 years ago? Maybe the problem is that we've grown way too comfortable with the story of Jesus. Nice man, right? Taught us to love one another, said not to judge people. We celebrate his birthday every year. It's time to put away this small, safe version of Jesus, says Cy Kellett. Nobody that bland could have transformed the world. In A Teacher of Strange Things, Cy presents Jesus Christ undiluted by sentiment, with all his radical words and deeds uncensored. Do you know someone, your son or daughter perhaps, or maybe your mom or dad, who needs the friendship of Jesus Christ? Do you? Order your copy of A Teacher of Strange Things by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, and this is actually a very difficult issue, the father who knocks over the stack of blocks, because both Trent and Darren, who's running the board, have toddlers, a lot of toddlers at home, and this is for parents of toddlers who knocked over the blocks is actually a daily crisis in the home. This is not at all theoretical for you two, is it?
No, it's not. And the child makes what seems to be a valid point, like, you ruined it. It's gone.
Yeah, you ruined it.
And then so what Van Inwagen tries to do is, it's like, well, I'll just put them back together again. But it's like, wait, is it the same stack? I mean, even if I use molecular precision to get them in exactly the same place, we couldn't say that it's like the same thing. The same stack that my child had built. And so he offers us an objection. Now, I don't think he actually considers this a sound objection to the resurrection. As a philosopher, he just offers it for thought. To say, well, okay, even if God puts all of our parts back together, how do we know that it still is us? Just as I put all the blocks back together, it's not the same stack. Maybe we're not the same person. And we were talking about this to say that, well, wait a minute, there's no how do we resolve, I guess, the dilemma here? I think the key is to show that the stack of blocks and me as a person, there is a crucial disanalogy between the two. and that is that the stack of blocks exists as an aggregate. They have their only identity is the action that was done to them in the past. There's nothing that unites them together into a single object. Their singular identity as a tower is only like in the mind of the child who built them. They're an aggregate. They're just a collection of together. That is what gives them their identity, the child's thought about them. And so, yeah, you can't recreate something that the kid made. But what makes you and I, what gives us our unity is not just a thought about us. Well, not just a thought, but it's God's thoughts about us and thinking about us and uniting our parts in an immortal soul that gives us continuity. So to take Van Inwagen's example, I might say, well, imagine I have my grandfather's watch. Okay, he built this pocket watch for me, and I decide to go and get it clean. So the watchmaker takes apart the watch, cleans it, puts it back together again, and I wear it. Is it still my grandfather's watch? And I think there we're much more likely to say, yeah, that's still my grandfather's watch.
Yeah.
Even if the watchmaker took it apart and cleaned it and put it back together, the assembling of the watch is not like the reassembling of the blocks, the tower. The watch has more a function and a purpose and something that gives it more of an intrinsic unity to it. And so then how much more so would we as organisms united with an immortal soul, how much more kind of unity would we have that would allow us to maintain that continuity that is necessary in something like the resurrection?
Okay, so I mean, on the one hand, that philosophical assurance that you just gave me does help me. On the other hand, we have the Lord's promise, so we don't.
Right.
So you can go either way. For people who are, philosophically disposed, you can solve these problems one by one. But it's also true. It's okay to just accept the Lord's promise that you'll be raised.
Well, I mean, essentially, we might have philosophy that could show us that resurrection is not logically impossible, but that doesn't mean that it's going to happen.
Yeah.
What gives us our hope that we'll rise from the dead is not just that it's possible, but that it already has happened for our Lord Jesus Christ. And he has promised that those who believe in him, they will rise as well. And that's the source of our promise. You go back to John chapter 11 and talking about Lazarus and the resurrection. And it's interesting when Jesus goes to speak with Lazarus's sister, he says to her, "Don't you believe your brother will rise?" And she says, "Yeah." And I wish, like, whenever I read it, I want to read it in this tone.
Yeah.
"Yeah, I know on the resurrection."
Yeah.
Yes, we always read it like, "Yes, I know at the resurrection." But almost it's kind of like when somebody dies and they're sad and we tell them, like, well, they're alive. You'll see them again. You want to say, like, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It hurts now, though. It hurts now.
Right.
Even if I get this promise in the future, that doesn't take away from it hurting now. With the resurrection of the dead, it's kind of exasperation. Like, if any other person is telling me this, whatever. But what she doesn't realize, of course, is what Jesus then says, I am the resurrection. I am. Your brother will rise because of me.
Yeah.
And just to show you that you can have a full and complete trust in this promise, I will give you a sneak preview right now. And then he goes and then he yells. And then I wish I could have been there. Well, I mean, I should have been there to see all of Jesus' ministry. But to just see Lazarus, like his head's covered and his feet he's jumping. It's almost like a cartoon a little bit. He's bound up in the burial.
You mean. He's jumping out. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. He's got to kind of hop his way out of the tomb. Right.
And then it's just like, you're here. And like, I imagine it'd be something like, what happened? What's going on? You got to add a little bit of levity in these situations. It's a joyful thing.
It is
a miracle. And
right. And then Jesus says, of course, those words that also are for each of our hearts, untie him and let him go free. I mean, such a beautiful teaching there about the role of the church in the life, even of those who have new life.
And think about it. Think about even that when we look at the resurrection of the dead, even going back to Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, death instills a terror in us that's universal. I mean, people either want to try to escape it with technology. I mean, throughout human history, people have always tried to escape death. Through most of human history, they wanted to achieve immortality through their name. If I can do something, build something, have progeny, have a kingdom, even if I die in my body, I live on in my name, I guess would be in a lot of places people who wanted to.
Yeah, right.
I mean, think about everyone has wanted to escape death. I think throughout a lot of human history, they've tried to escape death through vernacular immortality. I become part of the vernacular. My name lives on, even if it has to be infamy. I'm still alive in some way. People won't forget about me. And then today you have people who want to upload your brain to a computer or reverse the aging process. Just the idea that we could just become nothing and not matter to anyone and be forgotten and be gone, and that's it. It fills us with fear. But that's why in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says, "O death, where is thy sting?"
Yeah.
That we naturally have an apprehension about death because it was not a part of God's plan, but it doesn't debilitate us as Christians because of our hope in the resurrection of the dead, grounded in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so that fear of death that might bind us and make us afraid to do anything, Jesus, through his resurrection, can say, untie him and let him go free. We are untied from that fear and can go free now.
Do you think, and now this is a little off topic, but as you're saying it, I was thinking about all the people who built the world that we live in today, just these thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of men and women who chose the celibate life and built the monasteries that built Europe and all that. Do you think that that's I can't think that, well, a couple things. One, it's unique in all of history. It never happened ever before or since that there's this great wave of people who just devoted themselves entirely to the service of others and went out and transformed. Even the physical landscape of Europe is nothing like it was because of these people. And it couldn't have happened, I don't think, unless they had faith in the resurrection.
Right. And the faith and understanding that this life is not all that there is.
Right.
Our goal is not to be, what is the old adage? Whoever dies with the most toys wins. It's like,
that's
no.
a terrible idea.
Well, I love Jesus's parables to that idea. Think about essentially, if he told us today, he would say, look at this guy that has his Amazon wish list fulfilled and he has to get another room added to his house to fill up his Amazon wish list. You idiot, your soul will be demanded of you tonight. And what good will your Amazon Prime deliveries be? All this stuff that you have, because the eternal life that awaits us. And that is why Jesus is preaching was so important to say, although many of the people at the time believed in the resurrection of the dead, the understanding that we are freed from our sins and united to God for all eternity through faith in Jesus Christ, that is what was being progressively prepared for when we look at the Old and the New Testaments. Because by the time Jesus comes, except for the Sadducees and maybe a few other Jews, there was a general recognition of the resurrection of the dead, though that was something that had to progressively be revealed to God's people because it wasn't as clear at the beginning of salvation history.
You know what? That's probably a good time to take a break then, because I want to talk to you. I want to ask you about the development of the idea, this doctrine of our resurrection. Its development throughout the kind of period of Revelation, and then its development in the age in which we live as the church reflected on that revelation. Because there are many ideas, like the idea of Trinity, that are there, but also need further elaboration in order for us to fully grasp them. So I want to ask you about how all that happened. But we'll take a quick break. We'll come right back. We're talking resurrection with Trent Horn today on Catholic Answers Live.
This is Archbishop Paul Coakley, the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Do you love praying for people? Have you ever wanted to use your gift of prayer to share Jesus with others and build up the body of Christ? Start a public prayer station with St. Paul Street Evangelization. Listen to people's needs, pray with them, or invite them to meet you at church. St. Paul Street Evangelization can help you get started. Find out how at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
He was a Jesuit, a cardinal, and a doctor of the Church.
Matthew Bunsen and the Doctors of the Church.
St. Robert Bellarmine is honored for his immense contributions to theology, including helping to draft 2 important catechisms that defended church teachings during the Protestant Revolt. Pope Clement VIII named Bellarmine a cardinal because, as the Pope put it, Bellarmine had not his equal for learning.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. A very blessed and joyful Easter to you and all of yours as we celebrate the resurrection of the Lord in this Easter season. A resurrection, as our guest Trent Horn has pointed out, has serious implications for us, that this is the proof of his promise to us of eternal life, that he himself is raised from the dead and alive. And alive today, every bit as much as he was at the very moment of that resurrection 2,000 years ago. I'm not going to give out the phone number. My brain almost went to giving out the phone number. That's weird when that happens. But we're just having a conversation with Trent today on this Easter Monday. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about the development of the doctrine of resurrection. Like Moses didn't know what we know about, well, maybe Moses, who knows what Moses knew, but the people of Moses' time, despite the fact that they were God's chosen people, didn't know what we know today. So how has this doctrine of resurrection developed over time?
Sure. So in paragraph 992 of the Catechism, it says, God revealed the resurrection of the dead to his people progressively. Hope in the bodily resurrection of the dead established itself as a consequence intrinsic to faith in God as creator of the whole man, soul, and body. The creator of heaven and earth is also the one who faithfully maintains his covenant with Abraham and his posterity. It was in this double perspective that faith in the resurrection came to be expressed. So when we look at the trajectory in salvation history, you're right. When we look at the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the idea of even life after death itself, or having a resurrection of life after death, there's only kind of very faint glimpses. That's why you have individuals at the time of Jesus, like the Sadducees, as well as the Samaritans and others who only believed in the first 5 books of the Old Testament as being inspired.
Yeah.
The Sadducees denied the resurrection of the dead because they did not hold to the later, especially the later prophetic writings, where this would become much clearer. So that's why it's interesting when Jesus engages the Sadducees on the resurrection of the dead, because they're trying to they give, like, the Tower of Blocks I gave you, they had their own philosophical puzzles. Theirs was the woman who is married to 7 men.
Right.
Who is she going to be married to in the next life? Though what's interesting, Si, is that puzzle does apply to some religious groups today, because Mormons believe if you are sealed in the temple as a good Mormon, you will be raised and have your own eternal kingdom, your own universe, basically, and you'll still be married to your spouse in the next life. So when Mormons say families are forever, they literally mean it. So
I don't want a universe. What would I do with a universe? I do not want a universe. I can't keep track of the stuff I have. What am I going to do with a universe?
My house is cluttered enough as is. Yeah, so you'll have, you'll become a god of your own world, but you will create spirit children with your spouse, and your spouse will also reign over this universe with you.
But that's not Jesus' understanding of marriage.
No, because Jesus tells the Sadducees that they are like angels. They are neither married nor given in marriage. So it's interesting, in Mormonism, they'll say, well, then there's a problem that arises, like, okay, what if a man, his wife dies and he remarries? Who is he married to? Well, he's married to both of them in heaven. So while Mormonism no longer allows for polygamy today, though it once did, it does allow for you to have multiple spouses in heaven. Though that was a problem for a long time in Mormonism, because what do you do if a woman, because a man can have multiple wives in heaven, but a woman cannot have multiple husbands, or at least that's the idea. What happens if a woman, her husband dies and she remarries in the temple? She usually was not permitted to remarry in the temple because she was sealed to her first husband. I believe that Mormons have changed that practice or doctrine now, that she is able to. And then they've kind of said, well, we don't know exactly how it's going to work in heaven. God will kind of figure that out, even though it's kind of a difficult little thing. So back to the Sadducees, they were posing this problem to Jesus, like, okay, who's she going to be married to in the resurrection, quote unquote?
Right.
And he says, you don't know the scriptures. But what's interesting is Jesus does not go to the books like the book of Daniel, where Daniel says in explicit terms that there are those who will rise to everlasting life and others to everlasting shame. He goes back to Exodus, to the first 5 books that they believe in,
right,
and says, remember in the burning bush, God said, I am the God of Abraham, not I was the God of Abraham.
Right.
I am the God of Abraham. I am the God of Isaac. And so this becomes, when you get to Daniel and Isaiah and the other prophets, much more explicit. And then when you get to the Hellenistic period, a few hundred years before Christ was born, you get some of your biggest testimonies of the resurrection of the dead in the book of the Maccabees. So in paragraph 992 of the Catechism, it says, in their trials, the Maccabean martyrs confessed, the King of the universe will raise us up to an everlasting renewal of life because we have died for his laws. One cannot but choose to die at the hands of men and to cherish the hope that God gives of being raised again by him. So it's wonderful motivation. Like what motivated the martyrs? Nothing you do to my body now is going to change what God will glorify in my body later.
It does seem to me that we often trade in this glorious doctrine of the resurrection for a kind of, modern kind of shrug. And I don't know what happens after death, but I know, I'll see my relatives again or something like that. That's really not good enough, is it?
I think the problem, Cy, is that a lot of people suffer from Patrick Swayze syndrome or Patrick Swayze and ghost syndrome. The idea they think like, who are you? And they think you just are your soul. So you remember seeing Ghost, Patrick Swayze, Demi Moore, right?
I know the movie.
Whoopi Goldberg.
I'm not sure which problem you're referring to. Oh yeah, Whoopi Goldberg. Yeah, the whole thing, and then the clay pot thing is so famous. But I don't want to talk about that.
Right. No, but remember, like in the movie, like Patrick Swayze as a ghost, it's just the astral projection of him, and he's wearing all his clothes, and he looks like us, and then he jumps into Whoopi Goldberg's body and starts talking through her. And it's this, it incorporates this idea that you are just your soul. Your soul is just this floating version of you, like in a cartoon or something like that. But your soul, I like the philosopher Edward Feser put it. He put it in a kind of a grim way. He said, a human soul without a body is like a dog that doesn't have his leg, its tail, its eyes, its tongue, or its ears. It's still a dog, but it's a really, really diminished dog in all of its capacities. It's really missing a lot.
Right.
And so that's... Go ahead.
Okay, now we don't want to panic people about the intermediate period. So I just want to say, heaven is heaven. Like you're gonna be fine, and all.
Right. Well, the reason you're gonna be fine when you are a soul in heaven is because God is going to give you everything you will need to have complete joy with Him while you're in heaven. So, I mean, your soul doesn't have eyes, right? Eyes are a part of the body. So souls can't see anything. But God could infuse knowledge of his heavenly existence directly into your soul. So you're not missing out on anything. But St. Paul is very clear in 2 Corinthians 5 that a soul without a body is like a naked human body without a tent. It's like, this is just really awkward. Yeah. I do not want to be in this position.
Yeah.
And so we think like heaven, we only think of it as just souls up there, these astral Patrick Swayze ghost projections, when the fullness of it will be having our resurrected bodies. Though in the interim period, God will not allow you to suffer want when you're in heaven because he can give you anything you need to make you happy while you're there. So I think that's important. And then it also comes into what maybe we could talk about here as we round out, is the understanding that it's important that going to heaven and the resurrection is why we don't focus only on souls after death. We focus on bodies. We understand getting our bodies back are important. And so while God's omnipotent, we show that respect by burying our bodies, by treating the body with respect even after death, because it's still a vital part of you. That's why the church is teaching that it is preferable to bury someone, and that there are rules related to cremation are so important to follow.
Because we don't want to accidentally, because our actions do educate us in a certain way. And so by taking certain actions, we could teach the wrong lesson about what we believe about the body.
Right, yeah. It's not like we're not going to, if you use the Adoration Chapel as a place to watch a movie, like you can't cause Jesus pain. But it's not good for you. It's not good for others to fail to respect the sacrament in its presence, even though that doesn't take away from God in any way because he's infinite. Much the same way, if we are not respectful of the body and do something like scatter your ashes over the ocean or at the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland, which people did not infrequently, and it's gross. They shut down the ride, and it's
that's
just
awful.
Yes, it is, but there's a lot of people who just love Disneyland and they want to be with the ghosts at the Haunted Mansion. So that's why the church in 2016 had a document called Instruction ad resurgendum cum Christo about the burial of the deceased and ashes and cremation. And so what it says about cremation is that the church raises no doctrinal objections to it, since God in his omnipotence can raise us from the dead. So cremation does not negate the doctrine of the soul's immortality. So cremation is not prohibited unless it was chosen for reasons contrary to Christian doctrine. Like you just scatter the ashes because you don't know, you think nothing is ever going to happen with them anyways. So what the church would say is you can't divide the ashes. You can't put them in jewelry. You can't keep them in your home. It has to be kept in the same way you would for a buried body, essentially. So the church has a preference that we would bury someone's body, but given the modern age and space requirements and health and environmental issues, cremation is now is certainly it's tolerated by the church.
Trent Horn is our guest. He's the author of Why We Are Catholic. You can find all of Trent's work at Catholic.com. If you want to buy the books, you can go to shop.Catholic.com. We're talking about the resurrection of the Lord. Well, we're talking about resurrection in general this hour, and we'll get more specific into some of the details of the resurrection of the Lord Jesus in the second hour with Trent. But something I find very comforting about the resurrection, Trent, is I have always found this belief that some people have, and I believe many actually, like Buddhists would have a belief like this, which is what happens when you die is you just go back to the source and you're like a drop of water returning to the ocean. And I never wanted to be a drop of water returning to the ocean because the drops of water in the ocean are completely indistinct and
they're gone. They're done for.
Like you
they're
can't,
donezo.
You can't get a drop back out of the ocean. So
it's kind of like there's this. I remember there's a comedian who did a bit about like the leaves that fall, and we're like, oh, it's so pretty to watch the leaves change at fall. But in reality, the leaves are dying, and if like they were aware, they would be like, no, we're dying. And like we're all like, this is so pretty, and like they're just like shriveling up and dying.
Death everywhere.
It's like Indiana Jones. It's like Raiders of the Lost Ark. They're all like shriveling up, or like Last Crusade when he drinks from the wrong cup. It's like the leaves. It's like you chose poorly. And they fall. Like if we're like, oh, it's beautiful, like a drop back into the ocean. If that drop were like conscious, it's like, no, not like this, not like this, not like this. And like it goes in and they're like,
Exactly. But the resurrection gives a sense of the Lord's love
yes,
for us, body and soul as individuals. And he doesn't intend to take our individuality away from us. He intends to perfect it.
I don't know if my leaf and like water droplet screams are FCC appropriate. I don't even know if these can go out on airwaves. If they let my Lion King out, I'm sure this can go out too.
All right, and I made a Democrat joke. I can't, like, this has been a horrible hour as far as you and me, but still the resurrection is beautiful and glorious, and
even if death tries to cancel us, Cy, we will never be canceled because we believe in Jesus.
Right, that's right. You can't be permanently canceled because he'll raise you right back up again.
Back up.
And no, I wish I kind of sometimes wish more people were trying to cancel me. I feel like in America today, you're not really trying if nobody's trying to cancel you. I know you get people try to cancel you all the time, and I feel like what's wrong with me that I'm not even I don't know. Bold enough
you're just so nice. I think honestly, and you should be nice. That should be okay. Sometimes I will do podcasts on really controversial subjects, and Laura's like, "Oh man, people are gonna really get mad." And I look in the comments on like, especially on my YouTube page. I'm like, "Oh, never mind. Nobody got mad." They're like, "Thanks for such a nuanced view." I'm like, "Dang it! I would get canceled and protested if I just didn't have so much nuance."
I know all the good people are getting canceled. The resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ next hour. So we'll focus on why the resurrection of Christ is so important. We'll talk about some of the evidence for that resurrection, which did happen, which is a historical fact, which is not just a spiritual reality, but is a physical thing that happened in this universe. If you had been standing there, you could have witnessed it. That's how I'm going to go out on a limb and say that. And we're going to talk about why. Why do we think of it that way? Why do we believe that? And what is the evidence for that? And we'll talk about some of the contrary theories of what really happened to Jesus, why we ended up with this mythology of resurrection. It ain't mythology, and we'll debunk some of the myths of it being a mythology when we come back with our guest and good friend Trent Horn right after this on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live, and a very happy Easter to you. Celebration of the resurrection of the Lord goes on 8 days, and then it goes on 50 days, and then it goes on for the rest of your life, and then it goes on for eternity, because the Lord is risen, and this is very good news indeed. Very, very good news indeed. And it's also good news whenever it's not, I'm not comparing these two things. It's not like on the one hand, on the other hand, but it's always good news when Trent Horn is here with us. Trent is an apologist here at Catholic Answers, an extraordinary speaker and debater and author of many things, including Why We're Catholic. Trent, thanks for coming back for another hour.
Of course. Good to be here.
And do your kids get Easter candy? Or that's probably a personal question, but do they get Easter candy? Do they?
They have the opportunity to earn Easter candy.
What?
If they can scavenge it up. No handouts here.
Oh, you are so anti-socialist that you make your children earn the Easter candy?
I make them. I tell them they gotta go find the eggs, and then they go and hire other children for at 1/3 the rate, so that they don't actually have to work. They just collect the surplus value of the eggs from the other kids in the neighborhood.
That's quite a capitalist home you're running there.
They're the exploitive capitalist children. No, we enjoy our time and praising the Lord and being joyful. And I just love being able to sing the joyful acclamations and divine liturgy and just, it's a little shorter now. And, it will be as Easter progresses. But, it's just, Lent is always a good palate cleanser, but you don't want to stay there forever.
No, you don't want to stay there forever. But it's weird that sometimes it seems like there's a certain kind of Christianity that's more comfortable with Lent than Easter. Like when you tell people, this is a joyful thing to be a Christian, they're like, I don't know. They just seem more comfortable with penance than they do with celebration.
Yeah, and it's always we need moderation. Celebrating all the time is not understanding the solemn aspects of our faith,
right?
But also falling into a kind of despair is also bad as well. You got to have a balance in your virtues and your interior life and your religious life.
So one of the things that you apologists all have to do, by the way, but when I go out and speak and it's question time, people always ask me this question. How do you answer all those difficult questions? How are you prepared to answer all those difficult questions? And I always feel like that's somebody who doesn't listen to the show, because I don't do that. Trent does it, Carlo does it, Jimmy or Tim does it. I don't have to do that. So but when I say you apologists, I mean you apologists. I'm not an apologist. I'm just the guy who introduces the apologists. So one of the main things that you must defend is the resurrection of the Lord. You have to be prepared to defend that if you're going to be a Catholic apologist, right?
Oh, absolutely. Though I will say, Cy, while this is a joyful season, I might like to get a little bit of my grumpiness out, just a little bit on this subject, though.
On the subject of the resurrection?
You're like, how could I be grumpy, right? No, it's about defending it. I would agree that if you're going to defend the Catholic faith, I would say there's really three primary things to defend. God exists, Jesus from the dead, and he established one church that exists today. Like those are like the three key elements. And I am concerned with many people, other like Catholics who engage in apologetics, other things, they only focus on like number three. Just to focus on, being Catholic rather than Protestant. We have one church.
Right.
Or maybe they'll do, I do atheism too. I'll argue the existence of God, and I have proofs, and, I have proofs from the Summa and, this and that. I'm fine with that. But then number two gets leapt over, and that concerns me. I'll give you an example. So I'm doing on, I think it's Thursday. It's on April 8th. I'm going to be doing a debate on the resurrection with a well-known online atheist, Matt Dillahunty, who's debated the resurrection many times. The only people I ever see out there's only one example. I've only seen one Catholic, William Albrecht, do a debate on the resurrection. I'm not familiar with Catholics who go out and do that much at all. I'm grateful for Brant Petrie's book, The Case for Jesus, but just focusing on the apologetics to defend that Jesus rose from the dead.
Right.
Protestant scholars and apologists have got us beat 9 times out of 10 of just the research and work they have done on that.
Well,
and it's kind of embarrassing.
Yeah, I think that's a very reasonable grumpiness, because it's a grumpiness in service to a basic principle that it is foundational to our faith that Christ is risen from the dead. If he's not, I'd go so far as to say something, and I know maybe no saint would ever say this, but I'll say it. If he's not raised, then we are, among all men, we are the most miserable. That's what I would say. I'd go that far.
Heresy. No, I'm just kidding. That is, you could also say our faith is in vain.
Yeah, that's right.
Faith is in vain. We're still in our sins. That's what St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15:17, that if Christ has not been raised, if Christ didn't get up and out of his grave, don't bother getting up and going to church.
Right. That's right.
Don't bother.
Yeah. He's raised from the dead. That's what gives all of this its coherence. So tell me about how you go about defending the resurrection of Jesus.
Right. And so that's why, I have focused as a part of my work. Like, I wrote my book, Counterfeit Christ, that does have a few chapters on the resurrection. My book, Why We're Catholic, has an entire chapter devoted to it. Though I have thought about maybe writing a longer, more academic work on the subject, because it's so important. And it's just hard for me that I guess, before I get into defending it, which I plan to do obviously throughout this whole hour, it's just sad to me that I feel like some Catholics have this attitude. We'll let the Protestants get people to believe in Jesus, and then we'll show them to be Catholic.
I think that's right. I think we do have that attitude sometimes.
Yes, kind of. It's like, oh yeah, they've got great stuff on that, and then we'll show them why they should be Catholic. It's like, well, we should be doing all the work. And of course, these people say, oh, this guy led me to Jesus and the risen Lord. I'm going to trust him more than you who just kind of showed up here. But to give someone the entire charisma, to give someone the existence of God, that he's become man, raised Jesus, established the church, to say we as a faith can give everyone the reasons, as St. Thomas Aquinas would say, the motives credibilis. I butchered the Latin. The credible motive. To show that belief, we need to be able to do that. And there's a variety of different ways to do that. Because it's interesting, because if you go back to Thomas, like his arguments, it's like, okay, here's the argument for God. Why though be Catholic? Why believe in Jesus as opposed to just being a Muslim or being a pagan? And the arguments there are a lot thinner, I would say. There's some arguments about the fittingness of the incarnation. But I think a lot of them is just like, well, when you look at the miracles of the church and its endurance over the centuries, these serve as divine signs to show God. And that has some reasons. But I have found more helpful in my own personal faith journey and for others to do a historical apologetic for the resurrection. This is something that was more common among Protestants in the latter part of the 20th century. So there's different ways to go about it, how to offer this kind of apologetic, if you would like me to go into them.
I would, as a matter of fact, and I'm trying to decide whether I'm happy that we have Grumpy Trent with us this hour, or whether I like.
No, I'm happy. I just had to get out of my system.
It's out.
I just needed to get out of my system. It's out.
All right.
And now we can learn. Here is how we can marshal the historical evidence, everything out there, and put forward a good case to believe that Jesus did rise from the dead and vindicated his claims to divinity.
Amen. Okay, let's do that. Because here's what makes me grumpy, is there are a lot of people who are leaders in the Christian church, whether it's in, they're Catholics or in other parts of Christian life, who will act as if the resurrection is not that important. And those people baffle
what do you
me.
What do you mean they act like?
Well, maybe it was a spiritual resurrection. They'll do all that kind of thing, or they'll be like, that's not the important thing is what Jesus taught, and all the miracles and stuff. That's not Christianity. I'm sorry. That's something else. It's kind of maybe an ethical.
This is common. This is common among liberal Protestantism, especially.
But we have it in our church, Trent. We have there's Catholic priests who will say this stuff.
Oh, totally. And these are, when I say liberal Protestantism or liberal Catholicism, it's the people who have bought into all of the academic theologians who are atheists. There are probably a higher percentage of atheists among theologians than the general population. I really do feel like
that is just
it is, because they get this weird disdain, and they're spiritually attacked, and they don't take care of their faith. And so you get them that they end up watering everything down so that it becomes, well, the Easter is a story of the resurrection of hope.
Yeah.
Easter is the story of how 12 people had faith in faith. What?
That's not what it's a story of. It's a story of a guy is dead, and then he gets up. He gets up from being dead, and he's alive again forever. That's what Easter is.
Alive and forever. He is not just merely cheated death. Jesus has not merely cheated death. He has defeated death.
I'm going to leave it there. We'll be right back with more from Trent on how to defend the doctrine of the resurrection right after this on this Easter Monday on Catholic Answers Live.
Miss a show? Make sure to catch up by downloading the podcast, available online at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
The Aquinas Writing Advantage program is part of Homeschool Connections' set of online courses for your Catholic homeschool. Homeschool Connections' website is homeschoolconnections.com.
We should pray because prayer is conversation with God, and conversation is the only way to build a relationship. We need that relationship with God. We should pray and talk with God about what's on our hearts, what's on our minds, what's active in our lives, the joys we have. We should share all of these with God. Prayer is conversation, and conversation is the only way to build a relationship with God. It's the most important relationship. All of our other relationships depend on this one.
All right, Trent and I have done our breathing exercises. We've calmed down. We're not going to be grumpy now. We're going to talk in a practical way about how we defend the thing that we celebrate today. We celebrate it because we believe in it. We believe that it is the truth, and it is one of the most important truths. And it's really good news. The Lord is risen. Jesus Christ is risen. That's what we celebrate during this Easter season. How do we explain it and defend it? That's how do we do a Catholic apologetic for it? So let me ask you a basic, simple question. How can we know Christ is risen?
Well, I would say that our argument for the resurrection of Jesus, and there's different kinds of arguments that people use. Some Christians just make it an assumption of the faith that Jesus did rise and it makes sense of reality. I don't find that to be a particularly compelling argument to just start there. I think we should follow historical evidence. A more classic argument has been to say that the New Testament documents are reliable, and so they're reliable historical documents. We can trust what they say, and they say Jesus rose from the dead, and so we have good reason to believe them. One of the problems with this approach is that ever since like the 19th century onwards, German form criticism and things like that, the people, even just regular lay people I know, don't have a lot of faith in the New Testament documents being reliable, even though they should. They are very reliable. They'll say, well, these are anonymous documents and the authors didn't know what they were talking about and they wrote decades afterwards. And so we can't really trust them and there's contradictions in them. So, we can't trust what they say, let alone about the resurrection. Another approach to resurrection that I use, at least to some degree, it would be something called the minimal facts approach. It was pioneered by a Protestant scholar, Gary Habermas, and also by Mike Licona. So they've done a lot with this particular work. A friend of mine, Justin Bass, who is a Protestant pastor and professor, I believe, he wrote a book actually called The Bedrock of Christianity that I endorsed. I thought it was a really great summary of this minimal facts view. I actually saw him a few years ago. We ran into each other in Israel, of all places, during the Stations of the Cross, because I was there for Easter a few years ago. A cool place to be, by the way.
I forgot that you did the Easter thing, and that's beautiful, Trent. And
it was so... Before I get to the apologetics side, I just must talk about this. So this is shedding grumpy Trent. It was the coolest thing ever to be able to do. And whenever COVID is done, all this stuff, I would love to do another pilgrimage to the Holy Land. And honestly, I had a lot of fun taking my group to the Holy Land over Easter. We were in Jerusalem for Holy Week. I thought it would be nuts. It was a little crowded, but it was still manageable. But here's what really shocked me. On Easter morning, I was the only one in the group who went to Jesus's tomb for Mass on Easter morning, because you got to get there early. If you're going to, it's a small thing. We were around the tomb, which is in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Everybody else went to, I think it's the Notre Dame Hotel. It's like the Vatican official hotel there, which is a great place. They have a beautiful service. But I was like, man, I'm here in Jerusalem. I'm going to Jesus's tomb for Easter Sunday.
That's so cool.
I got up at 5 a.m. It was still dark out. And the streets are just dead. They're empty. And I don't know if you've ever been to Jerusalem or not.
No, I've never been there.
It's because when you usually stay in a hotel outside of the old city, and then you pass through the walls of the city, and it's like going back in time, because it's very narrow and cramped, and there's like weird coverings everywhere. Like it's almost like you're walking through tunnels down the hallways. It's like being transported back, not all the way back to Judea, first century, but you feel like you've entered another world. And going this early in the morning, nobody was up. The shops were closed. It's an eerie quiet. It's dark. And I'm just making my way over to the tomb. And it's just like in the resurrection accounts with Mary Magdalene and the women. It was still dark out, and they were walking towards it. And I got there, and I was one of the first people. So I just grabbed my little seat in front of Jesus's tomb on the pew there. And then after about an hour and a half, it had completely filled up. Standing room only, and the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, Catholic, came in, said Mass. I believe it was said in Latin, actually. But the funny thing that happened, though, in this experience was that the Eastern Orthodox brethren, they're kind of like our kid brothers, and you love your kid brother, but sometimes he drives you up the wall. They were at the back of the tomb celebrating Palm Sunday because they have a different calendar. So while we were trying to do Easter Mass, they were doing Palm Sunday on the other side of Jesus's tomb. And they were, and when the Latin Patriarch went up to give his homily, they're like ringing bells and making a bunch of noise. And he was a good sport about it. He just shrugged his shoulders, and he just went and sat back down.
Wow!
And just continued the Mass. It's a cool place to be. But the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and this is important actually when we're talking about the resurrection, about facts. There is very good historical evidence that in Israel, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is built over the site of Jesus' crucifixion and his resurrection. What's funny, Sai, is that there are actually 2 tombs of Jesus in Jerusalem.
Why is that funny?
Well, I guess it's like funny when a clown dies funny. It's like there shouldn't be. But it's like there are 2 tombs. There's one, there's one for Catholics and Orthodox, the real one, and then there is one for Protestants. So this one was discovered in the 19th century. Well, and the 19th century British missionaries said this looks like Golgotha. The rocks look like a skull. And it's very picturesque and beautiful. So like if you look at the picture of Jesus's tomb in a like a children's book, like a children's gospel book,
it'll look like that.
It's called the Garden Tomb. And so in Jerusalem, if you go there, it's like a beautiful outdoor area. And there's just like this hole cut in the rock of the side. And you take a picture there and look up Garden Tomb Jerusalem. It looks like Jesus' tomb out of a storybook.
Okay.
The problem is that there is no historical evidence. And even the tomb, they even admit it basically at the site itself that it probably wasn't Jesus' tomb. But Protestants go there because they just can't stand all of the Catholic accoutrements in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
Apparently the Orthodox can't either.
No, but they can't. The Catholic and Orthodox, the incense and candles,
the smells and bells, as they say.
Smells and bells, and they don't like. Because what's amazing in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, it is a gigantic complex. It covers acres.
Oh.
It's huge and massive. And you go inside, Jesus's tomb is this small building inside of another larger building. It's like a Russian nesting doll.
Right.
When you go inside. And so they just don't like, it's not what I envision. But like for me, I'm like, historically, we have good evidence that this was the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is built outside of the wall. The tomb is located outside of the original walls of Jerusalem in the first century, because you remember Jesus was taken in order to be executed. He was taken outside of the city. You didn't execute people in the city. And in the letter to the Hebrews, it says that Jesus suffered outside the gate. which is, outside of the gates of Jerusalem.
Right.
Not the newer walls in the city built since the Ottoman Empire, but where this Holy Sepulchre is located is on the other side of the old walls of Jerusalem. So all that was discovered, of course, by Constantine and his mother
and Helena.
In Helena in the 4th century. So as I said, we have the good evidence for that. And so then what I would say, what Habermas and Lacona and others have done is what they say, all right, here's the approach. And this is what helped me in my conversion to Christianity, because I wasn't always Christian. I thought Jesus was just a guy, a nice guy, but just a guy, and he's dead now. Is that they said, all right, let's take a minimal facts approach. What are the bare bones facts? If you look at the New Testament, and this is what I did, I just assumed, hey, these are merely human documents, could have errors, could have truths. What do they say? I'm not going to assume the Bible's the word of God. I'm going to assume it's human writings that could be fallible. What are the minimal facts that if I got into a room with an atheist, a Jewish scholar, Muslim scholar, we all got together, what will we agree about Jesus? And what most scholars, even those who are not Christian, agree, what they agree on is that Jesus existed. Bart Ehrman says virtually every expert on the planet believes this.
Of course, yeah.
That, Jesus existed. He died by crucifixion under the reign of Pontius Pilate. And then that the disciples had experiences. They proclaimed the resurrection of Jesus. And most scholars would say the disciples sincerely believed that they saw the risen Jesus. They sincerely believe this. This is a quote I have here from a Jewish scholar, Paula Fredrickson. She's a Jewish scholar of the New Testament. This is what she said. I know in their own terms, speaking of the apostles, I know in their own terms what they saw was the raised Jesus. That's what they say. And then all the historic evidence we have afterwards attests to their conviction that that's what they saw. I'm not saying that they really did see the raised Jesus. I wasn't there. I don't know what they saw. But yeah. I do know that as a historian that they must have seen something.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you shared that, because I'm a little bit familiar with Gary Habermas's work and this and the idea that what you call minimal facts, what his goal is that any scholar will agree to these things. Once you assemble only the facts that the modern scholar will agree with, you get a really striking picture that something shocking happened. And the easiest explanation for it, or the most consistent explanation, I should say, is the resurrection of the Lord. But just one other detail that I believe comes from Dr. Habermas's work, and I want to ask you about it. The period of time between this resurrection claim and the time that the apostles went out is not decades or years. It's days or weeks. That within the time of Christ hanging on the cross and the time of people going out into the world saying, he's risen, we saw him risen, is even to the satisfaction of a good current skeptical historian, it's days or weeks before that's happening.
Right. So what we need to say here is that the proclamation Jesus rose from the dead was not a legend that occurred decades or even years later. The proclamation of the resurrection is what started the Christian faith in the first place. Churches were founded, missionaries were sent out based on this proclamation that Jesus rose from the dead. So in 1 Corinthians 15, that's written in the year 52, 55, let's say. But it contains a creed related to the resurrection in verses 3 through 8 that creed has been dated to within 5 years of the resurrection. Acts chapter 2 contains a summary of Peter's sermon at Pentecost, and that summary in Luke, the wording contains Hebrew Semitisms, like Hebrew ways of speaking translated into Greek, that traces that speech back to Peter himself. So when you look at the proclamation of the resurrection, it was very much at the beginning. It's not something that was just added on by people who never knew. We're talking about Paul, who was an outsider to the faith, James, who was an outsider, Peter, the 12. This is all in 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 8, that they sincerely believed this. And we have to ask what motivated these disciples who rejected, who felt abandoned, wanted to give up their faith, radically change and act in a way that no other messianic movement had ever behaved, had ever done before or since, frankly.
Something, even so, the historical, the scientist, the person involved in the kind of modern science of doing history, has to come away saying, as the scholar that I forgot her name, the scholar that you just mentioned, the Jewish
Paula Fredrickson,
something happened. Like you can't read these documents.
And there's the same thing. Gerhard Ludemann is an atheistic scholar of the New Testament, and he says that it is my conviction that Peter and the other apostles believe that they saw the risen Jesus. Now, he thinks they might have hallucinated, which is something we can talk about after the break. Something happened to them, and we have to figure out what was it.
Let's do that after the break. Trent Horn is our guest. He's an apologist here at Catholic Answers, a great author, including of the very popular book, which I will recommend to you if you're not a Catholic. Maybe get it and read it. It's called Why We're Catholic. We'll be right back with more on the resurrection as we celebrate Easter with our guest, Trent Horn, on Catholic Answers Live. Most of us Catholic parents agree our number one goal in life is to pass on the faith to our children. But here's the bad news. Today's world has a million ways to steal your kid's soul. Don't be afraid, says Father Sebastian Walsh. God loves your children even more than you do, and he desires their salvation more than anything. In his groundbreaking new book, Always a Catholic, Father Walsh shows you how to cooperate with God to bring about the fulfillment of his will for your kids. Always a Catholic reminds us that keeping our kids in the faith is about the way we live our Catholicism in our own lives and as a family from day to day. Order your copy of Always a Catholic by visiting shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. It's free, and you'll have instant access to our daily broadcast, the schedule of upcoming shows, and you'll even be able to search the archive and listen to thousands of past shows. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
Have you enrolled in the Catholic Answers School of Apologetics? Let me ask you a more important question. Do you believe as a Catholic that you have an obligation to share the Catholic faith? In fact, the Church has answered this question, and the answer is that all confirmed Catholics are obliged to share the faith. It's actually in canon law. Catholic Answers is here to help you fulfill that obligation. Our School of Apologetics courses will equip you to help all the people you come in contact with understand what the Church teaches and why. A great place to start is with all the Catholics in your life. Learn the art of apologetics from the best of the best and start sharing the gospel today. Visit schoolofapologetics.com. That's schoolofapologetics.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Our guest is Trent Horn. We're talking about the resurrection because Jesus has risen from the dead. But one of the things that we are required to do is give an account of our faith to others who might ask in good faith, might not ask in good faith, whatever. However the question comes, we are obligated to give some account of our faith. And it helps when we have people trained to do that, like Trent Horn, to explain to us what are the supports for believing that Christ was physically raised from the dead on that day in 30 AD or about 30 AD, on or about 30 AD, I guess is how they would say it in the detective shows. We're not taking calls because we're having just a great conversation about the resurrection with Trent today. So you told us about the minimal facts approach to the resurrection, which when you do that, when you just strip it down to what does every scholar agree on, and then you add it all up, you're confronted with something shocking happened at the time of the death of Jesus. An atheist is not going to say God raised Jesus from the dead, obviously, but even the atheist scholar is confronted with something shocking happened. So what are some of the alternate explanations for the resurrection?
Sure. So throughout the history of scholarship and other means like that, people have tried to posit alternative explanations for these minimal facts related to Jesus dying by crucifixion, the apostles claiming to have seen him after his death, their radical transformation. And so let's just go through a few of them. When you go back to the 19th century, which is German form criticism. The biblical critics, Venturini, Bauer, Strauss, these other individuals, they a lot of them, when they're criticizing the Gospels, they'll posit naturalistic theories. So I think there was one of the German form critics said that Jesus' walking on water was accomplished with like rafts hanging out like underneath the lake to make it seem like he was doing that.
Special effects, in other words. It was just a special effects thing, yeah.
So one of these critics has said, that's where it started, the idea of the swoon theory. The idea that, well, Jesus didn't really rise from the dead. He didn't defeat death. He cheated death. It was not a resurrection. It was a resuscitation. And so Jesus, he was taken off of the cross. His legs were not broken. And so what they'll say, and at first, I know it sounds like a very silly theory, and it is, but there are some things that have made some people think that is the case. Many Muslims, for example, embrace some version of the swoon theory because the Quran says that Jesus was neither killed nor crucified. Someone else was either put in his place, like Judas or a Roman soldier, or Jesus never actually died on the cross, and so he survived his crucifixion. I think the Muslim apologist Shabir Ali has said that Jesus didn't actually die on the cross. He was taken down and revived in the cool, damp air of the cave.
Wow.
But this theory has innumerable problems with it. First, it's just almost impossible for Jesus to have survived crucifixion. In 1986, the Journal of the American Medical Association said that it would have been almost impossible and detailed how Christ would have died by crucifixion. And it's a gory and painful way to die, frankly. When you look at, some people say, 1/3 of crucifixion victims actually do survive. No, that's not true. Some people cite that historian Josephus, that the Jewish historian Josephus, after he switched sides to join the Romans, he saw 3 of his friends being crucified and asked a Roman general to take them down. They were taken down, and they were given the best Roman medical care you would give to a soldier, and 2 of them still died anyways. So it's like, no, Jesus did not get anything like that. You take him down, he's put in a tomb. The odds are just very, very low. And we know he was stabbed in the side with a spear, and there's just a lot of things that add up with that, along with his scourging that happened before. Strauss, one of the German form critics, actually has the best rejoinder to this theory. He says, look, even if Jesus did survive, the apostles would not have thought he rose from the dead. They would have just thought, wow, he cheated death. He survived. And they would get him to a hospital and get him. They would never think this shambling corpse was the glorious king of life, I think is how Strauss put it.
Right, because he's so badly injured. There's no like, he's risen to new life. He's a mess at
Well, imagine saying, Si, like, wow, I can't wait to have a resurrection body like yours, Jesus. It would not, that's not what I want. So the swoon theory has, ironically enough, died. There are a few, you only find the swoon theory among kind of fringe people. I think in 1960s there was a book called The Passover Plot.
Oh yeah, the Passover Plot, yeah.
Which tried to put out this theory. I think it added hallucinogenic mushrooms. I cannot entirely remember.
I know I read that as a teenager, but I can't remember what the full argument was. But yeah, it was that he had been given something when they put the sponge to his mouth, and it was all a big conspiracy to fake the whole thing.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Which you'd have to believe things that are unbelievable about the apostles themselves. I mean, they just all come across as honest, trustworthy people. There's no indication that they're involved in any kind of fraud. And then they go and die themselves. Why would they be involved in this?
Right. So, well, that brings us to our second theory. So we have the swoon theory, which would just be Jesus dying and coming back to life. No, sorry, not dying, escaping death, cheating death, and the apostles are fooled. They think like, oh, wow, he's risen, and they misunderstand that he's only been resuscitated. The other theory would be the fraud theory. So there's an older theory among the German form critics that said that the apostles lied about the resurrection because they wanted to live the life of traveling preachers. You get free meals, you get all these creature comforts, you're a celebrity. Hey, why not do this? And that has plausibility for about 2 seconds until you start to actually think about what these men went through. The biggest rejoinder here is that liars make poor martyrs. If they're lying about this, what drove them to die for this truth, to die for belief in Jesus' resurrection, and not just die, but to continually be persecuted? Paul in his letters makes it clear. First, Paul was persecuting people. We know they're being persecuted. Paul was doing it.
Right.
He talks about how he received lashings from the Jews who led the synagogues, and Luke talks about riots and people being thrown out of town and being stoned. It's nothing you want to go to. There's easier ways to get a free meal. And Paul, ironically enough, in his ministry, did not take the free meal even.
Right, exactly.
He specifically said that he would be a tent maker and pay his own way. So the fraud theory, it just doesn't account for the disciples' sincerity. Now, let me address two atheistic objections, one weak, the other strong. So the weak atheistic objection, if I do, would I have time to address these?
Yeah, you do, actually. Yeah, you have time.
Okay, so the weak one would be, what do you mean nobody dies for a lie? What about Muslim suicide bombers? What about people in other religions? They die for lies all the time.
Well, they don't believe it's a lie.
Well, that's the problem. People don't die for what they know is a lie, but many people will die for a lie that they think is true. So Muslim suicide bombers today do not have access to Muhammad's revelation 1400 years ago. But the apostles had access to Jesus's tomb to know whether he did rise from the dead. I mean, if I met a friend and they seemed to have come back to life, I would go dig up their grave. If their body was not there, that's where I would go and check. Is this the case? Is the body still there?
Right.
And if it's not there, I would have questions. Because the first thing I might think, if the body was not, I want to check the body because I might think. And what's funny is there is one atheistic critic who has put forward this explanation you don't hear a lot, is the twin theory.
Oh, that's right. Jesus had a twin. I have heard that one. Yeah.
He had a twin.
Yeah.
And so people met the twin, a long lost twin, and they
Ted from Nazareth,
so this is
who now says, "I'm not Ted from Nazareth. I'm Jesus, my brother from Nazareth."
That's right. And so it's his twin brother, which runs into a whole host of problems because there is no record in any of the accounts of Jesus of him having a twin, of this person being able to, what still happened to Jesus's body that's been laid in the tomb? Did the twin go and with superhuman strength move the stone and get rid of the body of his brother and lied about this? And where did he go after the ascension and the resurrection? It really does start to fall apart. So the swoon theory, the fraud theory, the twin theory, these are more fanciful theories that have been accounted for.
If I
maybe in the next. Oh, go ahead.
I just want to say something about the fraud theory too. I mean, when you read what the apostles themselves wrote, you can't write what St. Paul writes about love or what St. Peter writes and be a fraud. Like there's evidence in their personalities and just in the. I mean, these are words that have survived thousands of years because they are beautiful. I mean, everybody.
It's not the work of hucksters.
No, it's not at all. It can't be the work of hucksters. It's not possible. It would be like saying, T.S. Eliot was just faking it about being a poet. He can't be faking it. You can't write that quality of poetry and be faking it. By the nature of the act, you prove the thing. You're an apostle because you can teach like that. You're a poet because you can write like that.
And so it's important to establish this main minimal fact that the apostles sincerely believed Jesus rose from the dead when they had every reason not to believe that, because in ancient Judaism, nobody rose from the dead until the end of the world.
Right.
So that is, and Messianic movements fall. Oh, the strong objection. Let me cover that as well.
Okay.
The stronger objection is, well, how do you know they could have recanted? Or how do you even know they were martyred? How do you know that? And the way we can do that is, first, there is a strong tradition of the martyrdoms of Peter and Paul recorded in the early church fathers. We have very strong evidence for that. Also, I would say that we don't necessarily need evidence of martyrdom. We just need evidence of willingness to be persecuted. So, and that is quite evident in the Acts of the Apostles, the letters of Paul. It's also confirmed in ancient Roman history because Tacitus tells us that Nero persecuted Christians. We have a letter from Pliny the Younger, who was the governor of a region called Bithynia, he wrote to Emperor Trajan saying, what do I do with these Christians? They seem like suspicious people. The emperor says, look, interrogate them. If they're Christians, give them a chance to recant. If not, send them to the lions. So even there in the protocols of the 2nd century allowed people the opportunity to recant of their faith, which is something we never get from any of the 12 apostles, any of the founding members of Christianity. We never see any recanting, which would have been fatal to the early church if that word had spread out.
We'll take a quick break. We'll continue with the objections to the resurrection and how a Catholic apologist deals with them. Right back with more with Trent Horn after this on Catholic Answers Live.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
We have a big problem. Our culture is dying, and souls are in danger of being lost. The answer is conversion to Jesus Christ in His church. St. Paul Street Evangelization is a Catholic organization, and we have hundreds of teams spreading the good news throughout the country. But we need your help. The harvest is great, but the laborers are few. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
I told him about the woman who came to me and said her 2 children hadn't spoken to each other for 2 years. Their grandma died, and she was very wealthy. She left half to each one. She said they're arguing over a commode. She said it's inlaid. Can you imagine being in hell and somebody saying to you, what are you here for?
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live on this Easter Monday. A very blessed Easter to you and all of yours. I hope you're celebrating. I hope you've got some alleluia in your heart. If you don't, a little alleluia in the will is okay as well. Just we've got to have that alleluia in us because the Lord is truly risen. Whatever our feelings might be, whether we're going through hard times or good times, the Lord is risen. The Lord is risen. And so we faithfully say, Alleluia, praise God, the Lord is risen. Here to help us defend the resurrection of the Lord is Trent Horn. We've talked about the swoon theory. We're talking about some objections to the resurrection. Jesus wasn't really dead. The fraud theory, the apostles made all this up. How about the legend theory? People say, well, as a matter of fact, I'll tell you what's going to come up. We're going to talk about the legend theory, the hallucination theory, and the spiritual resurrection theory, and then we'll kind of wrap up after that. And so I want to get your take, Trent, on the legend theory. Well, this is just all a legend that developed over time.
The problem is, I would ask that person, when did the proclamation of Christ's resurrection begin? And can you identify early Christians who did not believe in the resurrection? Because when you go to the documents themselves, the earliest ones we have, like the earliest documents, like 1 Corinthians, Paul's letters are some of the earliest that we have. Resurrection belief is well established among Christians, and that is the basis of the apostolic preaching. It's not some kind of a new novelty that has been introduced. This is the backbone of the Pentecostal preaching, the apostolic preaching. You would have a better chance to this argument if, like, you could show, okay, well, here the first documents never mention the resurrection at all, and then at the end of the first century we start getting talks about the resurrection. We don't have that. What some people will do with the legend theory side is they will say, okay, but here's the problem, Trent. Look at the Gospels. The resurrection accounts get more and more complicated over time. Mark is just a young man and no resurrection appearances. Matthew and Luke have guards, and there's the young man is an angel or 2 angels, and then there are appearances. We see a story growing over time. And I would say, well, if you're going to do that, then we need to put Paul before Mark. And Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15:3-8, Christ has died, he was buried, he rose, and then he has appearances to Peter, to the 12, to James, to 500 other people at once. So that's way more fantastic than anything we see in the Gospels, yet that's the earliest testimony that we have. So, you could say either that the resurrection narratives, the appearance narratives in the Gospels, Some describe details that others don't. Even if you took a more critical view and said there are legendary accretions here, I don't take that view. But if you took that view, it wouldn't negate the original core of the story, which is a miracle actually took place. That part is not a legend. So I think that's the legend hypothesis in its most robust form would try to go in that direction.
Okay, then let's talk a little bit about the hallucination theory. But are we talking about Jesus hallucinating or the apostles hallucinating?
The apostles.
Okay, so
this is easily the most common theory among scholars. If a scholar doesn't believe in the resurrection,
I've heard it described as mass hysteria, something like that. Have you ever heard that?
Yeah, so there's the idea that maybe Peter had a grief-induced hallucination of Jesus. And it's not uncommon for someone who is in a state of bereavement or mourning the death of a loved one to believe they have talked to their loved one after their death. The idea is Peter thinks Jesus is alive, is risen from the dead, has this grief-induced hallucination. He tells the other apostles, it kind of spreads like wildfire, this mass hysteria, and then they go and make this proclamation, and that is where everything arose. The problem with there's a lot of problems though with the hallucination theory. Let me just try to run down them all. Well, number one, I'm not so sure Peter was grief-induced. Maybe he was grieving. He could have also been angry. He had been duped. They had all been duped. I don't think we should just rush to the idea that they were grieving. I'm sure maybe after Jesus came back to life, there was a sense of sadness of having abandoned him in the first place. But I might have felt like at that moment, good, I'm glad we abandoned this fraud, this fake who got crucified. So I'm skeptical that Peter was even grieving at all. And so, but I mean, let's even grant that as the case. It still does not explain the involvement of St. Paul or James, who were outsiders to this, who were converted after Jesus appeared to them afterwards. They were not grieved. Paul was not grieving Christians or Jesus in any way, shape, or form.
So would you say that when Paul writes that he saw the risen Lord, that is first-person testimony of a person who did not believe in Jesus, but then saw him risen and became a believer? It would be just like me saying to you, Trent, I saw the risen Jesus. In Paul's writing, we have that.
Yes, and so what some skeptics will say is what Paul is talking about is just a vision he had. He had some kind of hallucinogenic religious vision, and he didn't actually see a bodily Jesus. He's talking about a vision of Jesus, not a bodily Jesus. And that even in Acts of the Apostles, the people with him on the road to Damascus didn't see Jesus either. It was a vision. And I have a few replies to that. First, I think we have good evidence that the Paul's conversion in Acts is historically reliable because it's written by Luke, and Luke knew Paul. Paul knew Luke. Paul called him the beloved physician in Colossians 4:14. And Luke in Acts uses the first person plural pronoun we to talk about journeys with Paul. Like, we went here, we did that. And so in the accounts of Paul's conversion experience, yes, his traveling companions do not see Jesus, but what it says is that they saw a light but didn't see Jesus, and they heard a voice but didn't recognize it. That's a classic contradiction. They say, well, in Acts 9, it says they heard the voice, but in Acts 22, it says they did not hear the voice. How do you reply? The difference is that the Greek word akuo, like we get the word acoustic, can mean hear in different senses. Like if you and I are at an airport, Cy, and we hear we're waiting for our flight to be announced, and there is a noise over the intercom, and I say to you, Cy, did you hear that? I don't mean did you notice the sound. I meant like did you get the words the guy was saying?
Right. Yes, I see. Yeah. Okay.
So it's like did you hear that? As in, did you catch all the words? So what Luke is saying is that the traveling companions, they saw a light, they recognized a voice, but didn't hear what the voice was saying. Only Paul, saw Jesus and understood Jesus's words. It was directed to him, but it had an extra sensory thing. It was not a purely subjective vision that he had.
Right.
So when Paul is saying this, he says in 1 Corinthians 9, also, Paul says, have I not seen Jesus our Lord? He's saying he's equal to the apostles, and he just says, have I not seen him? Have I not seen the Lord? It's the same word just for seeing something with your visual eyes. So the hallucination theory doesn't explain Paul's involvement, James's involvement. It also does not explain, once again, if I hallucinated and thought someone rose from the dead, I would check that person's tomb. And we have good evidence that Jesus' tomb was discovered empty. People will say, well, that was just a legend added onto the story to make it seem more plausible. And I would say no, because in the gospel accounts, it's women who discover the tomb. And in the ancient world, women's testimony was highly unreliable. You didn't trust it. If you want that in the Gospel of Peter, that is written in the 2nd century, it's a fake. When they write the resurrection, they have all the Jewish priests and the Roman guards there to see the tomb is empty because they want to make it reliable.
Yes.
The gospel authors don't do that. They just want to make it accurate as to what really happened. And then finally, hallucination theory doesn't really work because we don't have examples of mass hallucinations of a group of people seeing something they were not primed to already see, that they all make out as the same visual type of hallucination that they're undergoing. We just don't have evidence of that. We have evidence of people like experiencing the same psychosomatic illnesses together, but not like hallucinating the same thing together, especially that they were not expecting to happen.
All right, so the most prominent, I think, probably objection is there was something spiritual happened, Trent, but this was not a physical resurrection of Jesus.
Right, and so someone here, this is like the liberal Christian view, it was just Jesus' spirit that rose. That's still supernatural, but it's a lot harder to prove that actually happened without like an empty tomb or something. And so what I would say is that, well, no, Paul, when he speaks about the resurrection, he is talking about bodily existence. The resurrection appearances in the Gospels make it clear Jesus consumed food. All of the appearances have some kind of food element to show this is not a mere spirit. Because here's the thing. People in Jesus' time were aware of visions, dreams, and ghosts. When they were out on the Sea of Galilee in the storm and they saw Jesus, at first the apostles thought, no, it's his ghost.
Right.
So why wouldn't they have just said, oh, we saw Jesus' ghost or his spirit, and now he is in the bosom of Abraham?
Right, because that's perfectly acceptable. That wouldn't have been a bad thing to say.
Right. You would have just said, well, I saw his spirit, and now he reigns with God in heaven, or he is in the bosom of Abraham. Or you could have said, I had a vision. I had a dream in the night. When Paul has a vision of the Macedonian man, it says he had a vision in the night, which is another way of saying a dream. Even when Paul has a vision of heaven in 1 Corinthians, when he talks about going to the third level of heaven, he says, I don't know if I was in the body or outside of the body when that happened. But with his appearance of Jesus, he says, no, I saw Jesus. I was in the body. I knew what happened. He doesn't make that any kind of qualifier in that way.
So have we exhausted all of them? Have we exhausted all the objections to Jesus, to the resurrection?
The alternative explanation. Some people will say, you know what, I don't believe in miracles. There's no good evidence for miracles. I just don't think I can believe in a miracle. Even maybe there's just something else. We don't know the answer. And what I would say is, well, that's why I believe as part of my apologetic, I share good reasons to believe God exists. Because if you believe that God is out there, that really lifts the burden of thinking miracles are not possible. But then I would say, well, look, just because things are strange to us doesn't mean we shouldn't believe them. That'd be like a 17th century Polynesian islander saying to British sailors, you'll never convince me a man can walk across a lake. Because it's his testimony, right? He lives in Polynesia. He's never seen frozen water. But the idea here is that if you raise the skeptical bar so high, you'll fail to believe strange and fascinating things about our world you've not been exposed to yet, because you're conditioned to think reality only works according to the way that you've experienced it. And that would be an example. Actually, that was an example given against David Hume, who wrote one of the most famous criticisms of miracles in the modern world. It's like, okay, I can't believe something that contradicts my experience. What if my experience is not robust enough to understand the world around me?
Right, exactly. And that is the case for many of us moderns, because we've been cut off from those experiences that open us to the fullness of truth. We have been cut off, and for many people, not by a choice of their own, but because of all that has gone on over the last 500 years that has cut people off from that. But Jesus is risen. Jesus is truly, physically risen, and so will you be one day. Trent Horn, thanks very much.
Thank you, Sai, for having me.
And we're going to say Happy Easter all week this week. We say it today. We said it yesterday. We'll say it tomorrow because this is Easter week. This is the octave of Easter, and it's the time to be joyful and full of Alleluia because the Lord is risen, and we will rise with him, and we'll see you tomorrow, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.